We're live.
Thanks, Daphne. Welcome to Senate Education. It's Thursday, March 10th. So let's start with S-162. Everybody, the language is on our desks, thanks to Daphne. I'll remind those who are watching, as well as Senate colleagues, that this is compromise language from the NEA, the Vermont Principals Association, Superintendents Association, and School Board Association. S-162 is Senator Pershlick's bill having to do with collective bargaining rights of teachers. And so I'm wondering, maybe the best thing, if it's all right with you, Senator Pershlick, if you want to say anything, but then we'll pass it on to Mr. DeMarais.
No, it's fine. I think we can go into.
Okay.
Jim is just rejoining.
Okay, great.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
So I apologize to the committee that I missed yesterday afternoon, but I assume that this was worked on yesterday. So since Tuesday, it didn't seem like they were all that close, and yesterday we got closer.
No.
Oh, okay.
The short answer is that there was a brief time where it looked like the gap was closing and we could pick a date or like some kind of window. That didn't happen. So without agreement there, we just took that section out.
Okay.
So it remains as the law is now, as you get the contract on April 15th and then.
Okay.
Yeah, so that first section was the most controversial.
Right.
Nobody could really felt good about it in the end. So we went with the two sections where people felt comfortable. And Jim, if you're with us, would you mind taking us through the amendment?
Yeah, hear you, Jim.
Please think it's here.
He was here and then
Yeah, he was
and
here.
then he was off.
Right,
again.
but I see he's there now.
So let me just refresh my emails.
Okay.
There's anything happened.
Are we on YouTube?
Are we live now?
We are.
We are live.
Have you moved some of these items on the agenda, Senator Campion?
No, so for today, we have the new agenda. We're going to do this is 162. We probably won't do 211. We'll do PCB testing, gubernatorial confirmation, 219, which we voted on. I don't know if you were able to follow our work. There was germaneness issue, so we made a little change.
Right.
And then I don't believe we're going to do anything with 197, which you've been working on in health and welfare.
Right.
We were going to have a look at. So that's the order, but I'm guessing we'll probably wrap up by about 4:30.
Say something off of the agenda while we're waiting.
Please, yeah, as long as you know it works on YouTube.
So if anybody's watching this, I've been receiving a lot of emails from fellow colleagues at the University of Vermont about S248.
Oh, yeah.
And I just want everybody to know that I definitely support digging into it. So I hear that we didn't really cross over to have enough witnesses in. So I fully support getting Wendy Koenig in and the University of Vermont. And if there's time, I look to and if there's ways, other vehicles to add something to it. I think we do need to dig into the language, and where I want to see some tweaks is rather than unions promoting or selecting, but using the governance bodies in existence at both institutions. I think there's merit to that, and that's what Cornell presented. So whatever it's worth, me stating publicly,
Yeah,
I fully support digging into this further.
Yeah.
And can I just follow up on that, because the chair and I have talked, and we understand that it's not meeting crossover, obviously, but we do have other vehicles that we can use to deliberate on this particular issue. And, you know, like you said, we need to look into it and look into the language, and we will.
Yeah, we have House Bill, I believe, I'm not sure the actual number, but we have received a House Bill Yes, I believe it's 456, which is strategic goals around the state colleges, and that would be our vehicle if we can get everybody on the same page. We would send something
Okay, thank you.
back. The other possibility is we do have last year's the House version of the literacy bill,
And meals. Do you?
which we know meals
Meals is
S100's
next.
up in the House now. So we do have a couple of different options. I've asked Daphne to bring in Dr. Ray. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's down in DC, and he's supposed to be, he testifies before Congress all the time on college governance. So he's going to come in and talk to us on Tuesday, hopefully, to, how boards work, what's an effective board, what really does shared governance look like when you have faculty and staff and others on there.
Great.
Roles and responsibilities of the board, things like that. If you can't, we can always call him if you want.
I might need to, get IT come over. It's saying that it won't let him unmute. It says the host isn't allowing unmute.
Okay, why don't you,
Maybe we'll just try one more.
sure. Jim, so and maybe one of the things we could do sooner rather than later on 248, you're a sponsor, I don't know if you are as well, but it's just start to think about pulling I think there's some people really for this and there's some people really against it. I think from where I'm sitting, and I could be wrong, the administrations in both groups, I think, are against it, UVM and the state board, and UVM and the state colleges. They're higher level folks. I don't know where their board members stand. And it would be interesting to bring some of these groups together to say, hey, what does that kind of compromise look like?
Yeah.
Is it a study? What is it that might get us there? Yeah.
And I think there are some concerns that can be addressed.
Yeah.
The concern about funding, fiduciary responsibility and how do you maintain your neutrality? You mentioned the concern about where it's coming from, whether it's the unions or whether it's the faculty Senate type institution. So, I think that's a good idea. It's always good to get stakeholders together to talk and see where there's common ground. It's happening in other institutions.
It is.
And it seems to be working. I mean, we've heard from the professor from where did we hear it from? Cornell.
Yeah.
And, as she said, when she's on the board, she's looking at the institution.
Right.
But there is some merit, I think, to having people who know the institution on the board. And that's where it's coming down on this.
I'll be honest, my instincts on it are move with caution, but that's just me. I could be wrong. Yeah.
So on the union piece, so versus the faculty senate, for example, at UVM, the medical school college is part of the university, but none of them are in the union, so they would not be eligible. And just the faculty senate is charged with stewarding the curriculum, so they already have some board roles. And I hope my union friends wouldn't be opposed to the faculty senate conducting the elections, which they already do, and all those things.
Well, that's certainly something that that they can discuss. Register their concerns. Yeah.
The other piece, if there's still time.
Yeah, we do. Yeah,
I'd love to open up to try to be a win-win. I know that David Daigle from UVM, when I was involved previously 4 years ago, he talked to the legislature about changing the board configuration. He wanted more seats for self-perpetuating trustees. So because it's a great way to engage very successful alumni to bring them back to the school. So if there's a way to also get the administrations of these having some more seats for them to engage their alumni to foster some alumni relations. But that's the conversation we had after we heard from them. And there could be concerns with that too.
Like Cornell had
64?
64.
And they have to have a descendant of
Yeah.
Mr. Cornell.
Legacy seats?
Yeah, they have to have a descendant of the founder
one of the board.
of the college
the-
itself.
Oh, wow.
Really?
Yeah, so the
Of the
fellow who
state.
just left, his last name Cornell, he was there for, I think he was on the board since he graduated. So now somebody else, that's what one of the faculty members said, the bylaws said, yeah. Yeah, I was surprised by that.
Could we do that for like a descendant of the first governor of Vermont? He has to be on all the boards.
All the boards, exactly. I like it.
How many boys do you have? Do you have boys? Do you have girls?
Two girls and a boy,
So they have to have the same name?
just easier.
Yeah, it's,
And I should know this, but there are no faculty or staff on the board now, but there UVM are.
So UVM has subboards, so we have like three, so there's the educational policy and institutional research, and there are faculty on that board, and they meet with the board members, so there is existing governance, and that's why I want to hear from Wendy, so that we then can inform the committee as to how faculty are involved currently.
Mhm.
Wendy, I
They're
you
like
mentioned,
subcommittees.
is there a Mr. Coffee who's on the board?
Used to be a Frank Coffey.
Frank Coffee, okay.
Chamber.
Choppy.
Mentioned, is he on the board now? She'd like to have him to come in at some point. Is that, seems, yeah, okay.
And there are currently students, but I think the bill calls for more students.
Right, an increase in students, yeah.
Can you hear, sir, can you hear me?
Oh, terrific, yes. Sorry about the
Sorry,
technical. You hear
Get
us?
off on the, you're not get off on video, so something's wrong.
I'm wondering if Daphne's gonna work on the volume. We can, a little bit better. How's that?
Yeah, fine. Can you hear me?
Perfectly, great. Thanks, Jim.
Sorry about that.
Oh, it's not, I think it's our end, I think. Daphne's looking into it, with IT. So we're looking at S-162. We have it in front of us, and if you don't mind taking us through it.
Sure, of course. So for the record, Jim Damer at Ledge Council, we're looking at draft 1.2 of your draft committee amendment on S-162. The section 1 has not changed until we get down further from the underlying bill. So subsection A on line 10 does not have the extra language in there that you've been discussing. B is as it was in the underlying bill, so it's making the non-renewal process subject to a collective bargaining agreement. So if the collective bargaining agreement covers that topic, it controls, not the process in statute. Same as the underlying bill. Going down to subsection C, so now on page 2, line 15, same thing for suspension and dismissal. Now it would be subject to the collective bargaining agreement if it covers that topic. And then we go down to section 2, sorry. So yeah, so same, I'm now on line 4, line 10, where it says no court action shall lie. Same as the underlying bill, and that means that a non-judicial or quasi-judicial process like arbitration is allowed. Then we get down to section 2 on line 16. Causes for licensing action is the same as in the underlying bill, making it unprofessional conduct for a supervisor to interfere with the teacher's right to interview for or be offered or accept a new teaching position. Then we have a new section. So this is going into the labor law part of Title 16, and it's a new section 1986 entitled non-interference with right to work to testify. And I'll just read through it with you. It says, subject to subsection B, which we'll get to, no teacher, administrator, or other employee of a school district or supervisory union shall be subject to discipline by the school district or supervisory union for testifying before the General Assembly or a committee of the General Assembly or before the State Board of Education. B has an exception to that. So B says a teacher, administrator, or other employee of a school district or supervisory union who testifies before the General Assembly or a committee of the General Assembly or before the state board shall not divulge information that is confidential to the school district or supervisory union or to its students or staff, and may be disciplined by the individual's employer for divulging such confidential information. And then C says a teacher, administrator, or other employee of the school district or supervisory union who testifies again shall, unless authorized by the individual's employer to testify on the employer's behalf, so shall state for the record that the individual is not testifying on behalf of the individual's employer. And the effective date is on passage.
Jim, in the most lay terms for those watching, tell us what this bill basically is doing.
Okay, so a couple of things. When you go up to the beginning of the bill, where we are on line 14, on page 1, line 14, when we're adding that language about the collective bargaining agreement, what that is doing is it's addressing the Northfield court case, where an employee was dismissed and did not follow the procedures in the statute. And the court held that those procedures in the statute had to be followed. The collective bargaining agreement does not supersede within statute. And the only action, there's no action was interpreted by the court to be no arbitration or court action. So you couldn't go to arbitration either. The change on line 14 makes the non-renewal process subject to this collective bargaining agreement. The change on line 15 on page 2, there's the same thing for dismissal and suspension. The change on line 10 on page 4, which says no court action, allows arbitration. So all those changes are designed to have the effect of having the opposite result of in the Northfield case. In other words, to allow the collective bargaining agreement to supersede the process in statute and to allow arbitration. And then section 2 is adding language that makes it a licensing action against the superintendent if the superintendent prohibits or directs someone else to prohibit a teacher from exercising the teacher's rights to look for another job. And then section 3 is the non-interference with the right to testify language. So obviously,
Jim, I'm going to interrupt you for a second because I know my cell phone is lighting up that we're not sure if you have the agreed upon language. So Senator Pertwee.
Well, yeah, that H language is at the end of section 2. I thought that was language that was objected to, but I don't know if I'm remembering it wrong or misinterpreting what this is.
Page 5.
Yeah, page 5.
Yeah.
I thought I heard, sorry.
Go ahead, Jim.
I thought I heard that in testimony earlier, but when they sent over their comments, this language is still there. So I kept it because I saw that their comments didn't change it. They're written, request for.
Yeah, I think this was in the original bill, and I think if we had the other language, I think that the NEA brought forward saying that the superintendent couldn't interfere, then this would make sense.
Relevant, right.
But I think without that, because the superintendent does have the right to say no in circumstances, so I wouldn't know how this would work with the current law, because since we're not changing the current law, it seems like this would be.
Does that make sense, Jim? Why we would strike H? Okay.
We'll take out, that takes out section 2 entirely.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to remember.
Section 2. So you think, so really, yeah, so it would all go, right?
Yeah, section 2 will go in its entirety.
Okay,
Well, oh, yeah, because I guess
yeah, because
we're,
if you're not changing,
we would still only have 2 sections.
yeah,
Yeah, that's the way we were thinking. We were gonna get rid of 1 and then have 2 remaining.
so that, removing sections 2, we have sections 1 and 3. And does that make sense, Jim?
Yep, all set. Just it.
Senator Burslick?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, please continue.
That's it.
Okay, nothing else.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good question.
Senator Terenzini.
This really might be splitting hairs, but on page 2, towards the bottom, 18 on, says the superintendent may suspend a teacher under contract on grounds of incompetence. How does one prove incompetence? In other words, the other qualifications for suspending a teacher, unbecoming, failure to attend duties, failure to carry responsibilities, et cetera, those are all pretty well defined. We could figure out what that means, but I could just see it like a fight between management and labor on what does incompetence mean in this language?
What line?
18, 19.
Page 2.
It just seems very subjective.
I think is that current language, is that current law?
Yeah, that's current law. Yeah.
Okay. So that's current law. So I mean, it's always something we could address.
I don't
Right
know.
now, it's on the books.
Yeah.
I don't know how long it's been on the books. The parts that we are editing are, really, we've added section C there, the underlined bit there.
Having to do with collective bargaining,
Yeah.
negotiating.
That being said, I mean, any member can always work to edit something, or we can always return to it, but it is current law.
Yeah, that's fine.
And there's a whole, I think
Please.
there's a process. If they were to say it was incompetence and they would disagree, then they would appeal and there would be a whole process to decide whether it was or wasn't met as a test. Same with these other ones.
Yeah, thank you.
Jim, I'm going to ask you if you would provide us a clean draft.
I can do it right now. I just made the
Yeah,
changes,
that's,
so.
well, what I'd like you to do is provide us a clean draft, email it to Daphne, and I'd like Daphne to
Yep.
email it to all the parties that have been involved in this negotiation. So everybody has a chance to look at a clean draft. So that would be Daphne Nichols, Francis, Bannon, and Sue Siglowski. As soon as you get it, if you would email everybody, that would be great.
You need to vote this out by tomorrow, yeah?
By tomorrow, yeah, so we're okay.
Can I ask another
Senator
question?
Terenzini.
I guess I'm asking my committee members this for your opinion, but we were emailed by a lot of different people for and against this bill. The ones who emailed primarily against were of sort of less wealthy districts who are struggling to retain teachers and so on. Does this bill satisfy their concerns at this point, in your opinion, or do you think they would still be against this? As
Yeah, so I can say something. I think this does. They were very concerned about section 1.
right?
That was the section, which not this section 1, but in the original bill.
The section we just
Yeah.
Okay.
crossed out.
I'm sorry, I'm a
No,
little,
no.
little
it's
behind, but I
fine,
just want to
and
make
it's
sure
been, it's a good question, and we want to make sure those folks are represented. So,
okay. So it seems like it's better than it was.
yeah, I'd say they would say a zillion times better.
Even agreed to, like this.
Yeah, it's been agreed to. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
All right.
Senator
Great.
Hooker?
Nope.
No? Okay, so Mr. Demaray's emailing, excuse me, Daphne's emailing everybody for another look. I don't want to rush this, so we'll just get a copy and maybe vote it out before we go today or tomorrow. So Jim, if you don't mind, we might have you back for the end of our meeting, which would be in about an hour.
Okay, this is great. Happy to come.
Great, thanks.
Okay, yep.
I'll tell you right now who is reporting this on the floor for bringing up the issue.
Well, it's pretty easy to record now.
It is now. Basically, only the effective dates are left.
I know, like, now they're gonna say like, what? Why are you doing a bill?
Committee, PCB testing in schools. Mr. Watt, would you like to join us? Thanks.
Nice to be here in person.
Great to have you here in person. Tricia with you? Or-
Yeah,
Okay.
Trish, there's Trish.
Ms. Capolino, good to see you again. Can you hear us? Terrific.
I can, yes.
Okay, wonderful. So here we are talking about PCBs.
Yes.
I did share with the committee that yesterday you and I had a conversation in the hallway about what you and the administration are proposing around PCB testing. And so why don't we start with that?
Sure.
Talk a little bit.
Sure. So for the record, Peter Walk, Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Conservation, just as a sort of scene setter, since you guys bounce around a ton. You asked us through the budget last year to support the mandatory testing for PCBs or indoor air in all schools in the state. What we have been doing in that time is developing the analytic capacity through contracted work, understanding what the sort of protocols would be if certain levels are found. The health department has been working through trying to better understand the data and set appropriate levels so that we can mitigate risks, understand how to adapt to situations so that we can maintain high quality education through the discovery. What that is obviously, it's taken us a while, and I'll admit that because it's hard, right? It's complicated, it's important stuff that we get right. And there are a lot of anxious schools out there that are ready to test, but also concerned about what they're gonna do with the information that they get. I think that's fair. So we've been working through those pieces. The conversation that I had, I think you had Dr. after we were in a few weeks ago, Trish and I were in a few weeks ago with Ted from AOE. You had Dr. Levine in to talk through how they developed their standards for school, what they call the school action levels. Dr. Levine was in for the same testimony yesterday in House Education, and I joined him for part of it, in part to talk through whether or not it made sense to proactively extend the timeline for testing. And I'll explain why I think that is a good idea, to which the committee responded that they are interested in ensuring if we think about doing that extension, then we think about aligning it with the other facility work that is going on in schools right now. So I think we can all understand the value of it. So our thought process around the extension of the deadline, starting from a place of this kind of conversation we had last year, right? Information is good. Information is valuable for everybody, provided that we can support people in understanding what that means. And as you can imagine, this is not to the level of a Bennington PFOA situation, but I was having a conversation with somebody about this today about the value of us being present in the community to answer questions, to say what we knew, what we didn't know, what it would mean for exposure, what, sort of different circumstances, all of those individual level kind of conversations with humans that are kind of important.
Once PFAS was found in Bennington, the agency, DC, everybody came down and was right there to talk to people, to answer questions, et cetera.
Right. Yeah. And it made it so that as we had hard conversations about what to do with things, it made it possible to have those because everybody had the trust and relationships to do that. And so that's an area where Trish's team has done really great work. She runs the program that manages those sorts of cleanups. It is resource intensive, right? It's human power intensive to go there and be present. And it's things that we like doing, but make sure that it means if we're focused in a community and being responsive to a community, it means we're not managing testing that's happening elsewhere to the level that we'd like to. And so it becomes a real strenuous task Tristan and I were talking today about how they're thinking about managing it within their team, who are already managing, thousands of cleanup sites around the state, kind of dividing up school districts. Some may have 10 schools, some may have more, some may, have more that fall into it, and trying to manage that piece. So we know the schools are all thinking about sort of major facility reinvestments with some federal dollars, with sort of in response to sort of thinking through the challenges that COVID has brought on and just trying to manage their school facilities better. There's a lot of planning and prioritization we want to do in partnership with them to say, here's kind of where we think you fall on the priority in terms of, kind of similar situations where we found PCBs in the past, the age group of the school, et cetera, sort of those topics that would lead and say, school district, does this make sense for you in terms of a rough time frame, like a quarter of the year that we would want to contest? There's going to be a lot of those conversations back and forth. And so I think we set ourselves up for an inability to provide that level of service that Vermonters are going to want in response to the discovery of PCBs in a school if we try to rush the testing process. And so I can't remember. I can't remember what specific, we talked about this yesterday and I should have looked it up. What day of 2024 was the deadline? I can't remember whether it was July 1 or January 1, it's usually one of those two, that we would have all the testing complete by. But if we're now up to, Trish, I think it's 318 schools, is that what you told me today?
Yes, right now we're expecting, we have about 70 schools we're still waiting for survey results to come back from.
So it's a reminder, that's the survey we did.
318 schools, districts
that need to be tested.
They need to be tested. That's the list.
So that's the list. So I mean, that's essentially almost a school a day in a calendar year, and so obviously take away weekends and whatnot. And you're talking about really doing a school every other day and this isn't blood testing. This isn't the custodian can go and take a graph sample and send it off to a lab. We have to have a contractor design a study for that specific school. Has to be in there for multiple, days, collecting the samples, collect them, send them off to the lab, all that work. It's just not feasible in my mind to do that well and to provide the back end support that's needed. And so that's why we sort of flagged it, that we think that it's worth knowing what we know now and not waiting till next year when we have schools that are really concerned that they're not going to meet the deadline, coming in and saying we need to push that, because it's just we know now enough to say that we should take more time to do this. So our initial proposal was the idea of extending for another 2 years to give us a 4-year period of time to work through those schools diligently, to make sure to align with planned construction projects, so that obviously we want to test in a way that mimics the school environment, right? So that if a school is about to do a major renovation project, we want to see what that renovation project does if they install if they've installed much more ventilation or whatever, what it looks like after that, because that's really what the school environment's going to look like going forward. And so timing those tests is just a lot like, and so
if I were, just to push back a little, if I were a parent, and I had a kid in elementary school, and let's say one of the things we learned from Dr. Levine was that it could be one classroom, and I found out that, that little one was in that classroom for 2 years. And it really was such a simple solution of moving them into another classroom. Given the impact that PCBs can have, particularly I think on development bodies, I would say we as a state should, what about upping staffing? What about, making this as big a priority as possible? What about, as we mentioned with Ted Fisher, identifying those buildings, if you will, around communities that might be vacant, that would be, those areas Macy's, the Macy's equivalent, if you will. It's those, and I know you're equally concerned, without talking, you're a dad and caring guy. That's.
No, and I get that. I think
thing.
that's why we would move forward with sort of based on knowledge, and we have really good work from, and we just shared this with your committee assistant, some work from this woman from the University of Iowa who's done some really interesting research specifically into schools, and about how to prioritize those schools where we think it's likely that something might come up, so that we can do those first, right? So that we will get to everybody, but we're going to do ones either that have a, for a timing of a project perspective, or the school vulnerability, or what we think is likely the case, that we prioritize those so that we get as many as possible. If we can move faster, then we'll move faster. It's not, saying that we're going to set a calendar out to 2026. It's more of a, as we do this, and let's say in the first round, we have 10 schools around the state that need the sort of hands-on support, right? Because schools aren't going to know how to deal with this. They're not going to know how to communicate it. They're not, we, the Department of Health, Agency of Education, need to be there. And it's a lot, so if we go into, when we went into like crisis communication mode in Bennington, we didn't do a lot of other things, right? And there's a lot of other things that you and the state of Vermont generally expects of Trish's team. And I want to make sure that we have the ability to do those things as well, because those are meaningful sort of pollution abatement, cleanup issues that really, matter to public health as well. So it's not like we're gonna do this slower and we're not gonna have positive health impacts in other places. That makes sense. It's all part of it.
Senator.
Just a question. The chair suggested that perhaps it's a staffing issue. And do you feel confident that, just pushing it out 2 years is going to allow that? I mean, if this is such human resource intensive, what does that mean?
So I think, obviously more staffing helps, but it's hard to tell you what, to do it on a really expedited timeline would be like a dozen people to make sure we had a crew that was ready to respond. And I don't think that's certainly not in our budget. And I don't think that's a lot of the resources that are flowing around the state right now are going to be able to support that sort of work. And that's
Senator.
And you talked about, the inventory. And I know that in institutions, we have the VGS inventory that was going out, or the school inventory. Is that the inventory you're talking about coupling this with?
So we did a inventory specifically of schools, districts, to say, tell us about your buildings, when they were built, when they were renovated, so that we could identify which ones needed to be tested.
Okay, and you're up to 318 now,
Yeah,
and
we're
another
still
70
waiting
to
on
come
about
in.
70, yeah.
And do you have a sense of the kind of higher priorities, if you will, that you talked about prioritizing?
So we are going to work through as quickly setting a schedule and prioritize those as much as possible, whether that's based on construction age or likely, And the good news is if we find no PCBs or not PCBs above the level, we can move forward, right? And so this gives us the ability to move forward in a thoughtful way, take some of the concern, that you've heard from the superintendents and others around what are we going to do when we find this? We all don't have a Macy's to move into.
Sure.
We don't have the $3 million to outfit a Macy's.
Sure.
Right. And we've had some of is the state contributing any cost to that? Right now, there isn't any money.
Senator Terenzini has a question, and then Senator Lyons, then Senator Shane.
Oh, thank you. The question, sort of a thought process. Is there a way, first of all, outside contractors, if I was a principal of my school or superintendent, I wanted to call some company in the community to come test for these chemicals, could I do that? I mean, are there companies out there that do this full time?
Yes, and so, yes, and those are who we're using.
So that's who you would do. Okay, so I was thinking if, could we say encourage, put into law, I don't know where, but say, all right, we want by, as we do so many other things, we want by January 1st of 2024, we want you to have your school tested.
So that's the way it's done now. The only reason why we have any engagement is because you all gave us, well, governor recommended and you guys gave us money to support that testing. So we anticipate that testing one school is sort of in the $15,000 to $20,000 realm. So our support to that is meaningful for a school district.
Right.
And so they could go off and test on their own now. I don't think they're likely to do that. And I think we could probably drive down costs because of the fact that we're doing standby contracts for a bunch of work.
Senator Lyons. She's behind you.
Thank you. I can see you. You can now. You can see me. It's good to see you. I was going to ask a similar question to Senator Terenzini's about contractors, but then take another step and think about the funding. Have any municipalities or school districts considered bonding for this? And then the state, does the state have kind of a contract, the lower price because there are more schools involved, and then some kind of arrangement with school districts that do go ahead earlier with their own dollars and for repayment to those districts? Have you thought about any kind of a boilerplate MOU that would allow for some accelerated testing? Because it does, I know we're caught between a rock and a hard place, and just trying to think through some other way of doing it. And I completely understand what you're saying, because I know what happens with this. You can't go test one room and that's it. You got to do everything. So have you thought about any of that?
So that's certainly a thing that we have done in other cases, especially for PFAS testing. We create a sort of a statewide contract that people are eligible to use. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit different in this context just because there's more support that's needed. And in reality, what I think more than the $15,000 to $20,000 in cost, it's if you go alone, then you don't have that built-in relationship with us to provide the technical and sort of what happens next support that you get if you sort of were going on the schedule that we're building out. I think that's probably, I mean, you have to ask the school that, but my assumption is that's of just as much value as the dollars themselves, depending on the school.
Senator Chittenden.
So the question before us is if we will support extending from 2024 to 2026 timeline to get all this done. The why we do that is really important. And I could support that if it wasn't just, if we're not doing it because we don't have the legal, financial, and communications capacity to handle the onslaught of all the possible things that might come to light. That doesn't seem like a good reason to me. What I would like to tease out in your report, you said there is some prioritization, some likelihood of schools that are more likely. It would make sense to me to extend to 2026 if the reason is so that we can prioritize the schools we have more reason to believe are a concern, so that we can remediate, address those, get that resolved, and then the ones that we have less likely concern, we will have more time to be able to test for those things, but we're less concerned, so we're putting them to the back of the line, so to speak. That's something I could get behind the support.
And that's what we're going to do regardless. We just don't know if we're going to get to the end of the line by 2024. It's kind of what I'm trying to suggest.
Senator Purcell.
What are we changing? Where is the 2024 date?
We put it last year.
It's in the budget from last year.
When the money,
It was our recommendation.
it was our recommendation, the legislatures. individual.
right? I mean, we were the one,
Yeah.
this committee.
Like-
really the
So
one.
just to step back, we put it in as sort of a voluntary testing program, knowing after Burlington, people thought, we thought people were gonna wanna test. You all layered on the requirement that schools test
Thank you.
And then the date,
by 2024.
do you know where that came from? Why 2024?
We-
Just in our infinite wisdom.
'Cause that's what
I didn't know if you
You
had
made it
testified. I didn't know if like Department of Health or
I think
DC
if
came
you-
forward and said, yeah, that's a good date, or oh my God, why are you doing?
I think there was a
2024?
back and forth.
I think there was a
Yeah,
back and
there was
forth
back
and we
and forth.
pushed you
Let's-
for more and at the time and you landed there.
It would be, that's good to know, thank you, but it would also be good to know, like, because 300 and whatever it ends up being schools is a lot to do in whatever, the 600 days that we have, so it would be good that we don't just pick another date. We don't just like, okay, let's just add 2 years, so if you guys could do a little chart of a timeline, like here's how many schools, here's how many days it takes to do a school, because I kind of agree with Senator Chittenden that just saying we need more time because we might need to respond, and that may be difficult. I'd rather it just be, this is how much time we need to get it all done.
Yep.
Which I think probably makes it mean that we need more time, even just based on that, let alone having to respond.
Right. And
And maybe, if I may, just, what if you were to come and ask us for this next year? I mean, just to see how it is for 2023, then it just makes me, it might give everybody some more time to kind of really get a good estimate. Do we need 1 more year? Do we need 2 more years? Senator,
Yeah, and just want to clarify a point. I'm sure I didn't hear you clearly a moment ago, but so here's a scenario. I have an ambitious school that wants to go get tested. I go out on my own versus going through you folks. I get the results. I say, oh boy, we have a problem here. I call your office for assistance. Did you say that you wouldn't have as
that's
much
a
support?
very good clarification. So
Yeah.
we obviously will support those, but when we know that when we've built out a schedule and have I prioritized those with buildings that are likely to cause issues, right? Then we have got that relationship up front. And so when those results come in, we're expecting them and can be ready to support. But if somebody just calls us up and goes, hey, we tested on our own and we found this, we won't know anything about the way in which the testing was done within the buildings, kind of have any of that stuff in advance to be prepared for. And so obviously it's just better if we're involved at the outset. That's all I was trying to say.
But, and I understand, I know that's not what you meant earlier, but it almost made it sound like if I called you for help, I wasn't gonna give a return phone call, if I didn't go through your program.
That was not, hope we all understand that was not my.
Yeah, that's why I wanted clarification, so thank you.
Senator Perch. I'm just kidding.
That's my name. I thought of the idea too of just asking later, but I understand that from your perspective, that would be difficult because if you don't know what the end date is, if you have to get it done, you would design a schedule to say, oh, do we design the schedule by 2024 or do we design it by 2025? I'd want to know it ahead of
I
time.
get it, yeah.
But if we do pick a date and then I think we did that with other things where we thought we could get there and then we can't because of staffing issue or other things.
As an implementing agency, I think that's one of the worst things we do in public policy because it sets everybody up for success, for failure.
Right.
And we're good public servants. We're gonna diligently work towards the date that you give us.
Right.
And it means that we're gonna have to do things in a way that is not as effective as if we had more time. And so that's just it's a bad precedent. So just to put it into perspective, the time frame from surveying a building, sort of understanding what a building looks like, to getting the results back to the community is like a 6 to 8 week process. And so if we think about that for every school, right, and then so let's say 1 out of 10 we find results above the levels that we then spend 2 to 3 months of good time with a community, working through what that means and helping them find alternatives and the like, you can see how that calendar becomes really challenged really quickly. And to speak quickly I wanted to just reiterate one thing about the dozen people, which was offhand. A dozen people of untrained, so anybody we bring on now, we'd have to train in these issues, how to do the communication. So by the time they became useful, it would be late in the process.
Senator Hooker.
Yes,
Senator Chinley.
if you could, can you explain about how these 318 schools got onto that list and how the 70 other schools will be coming on? And is there a timeline for the 70 schools to join the
Sure.
others?
I'll ask Trish to speak to the timeline, but as in the last legislative session, we were talking about which schools would likely need to test.
Mhm.
PCBs were phased out in 1978. So we set a pre-1980 built or substantially renovated deadline, date for testing. So it's any school that falls into that category was one that we thought needed to be tested.
Okay.
How many was that?
That's the 318. So that's,
And how many schools are there in the state?
I think I heard an estimate of like 450 somewhere in there. So we expected that the 300 number was about what we had anticipated. The 70 number is ones that have not returned that survey yet. And so Trish, I don't know what our expectation on those schools are.
So we just sent out the survey again. I think we might have all the public schools now, so it's mostly independent schools that we're waiting on results for. So Agency of Education and Agency of Education is going to help us reach out to some of those independent schools, but it might be that we start calling them to get them to respond to the survey so that we can get information on the age that they're built. I guess that's the best that we can do right now. I understand from health that some of the independent schools may not have internet, and so we might have to write letters to them or find out what their phone number is. So we'll continue to reach out to those schools to make sure we get their information.
Okay,
Yes, Senator Chinley.
okay, go ahead. No, go, well,
On the 318, still on this topic.
okay.
Of that 318, is there additional discriminating characteristics that you can prioritize within that group? Because I'm
Yes.
supportive. Okay. I was
Yes.
saying all high likely concerned schools by 2024,
So-
and then give you.
So I think it might be useful for the resident expert to walk through what that prioritization looks like. Trish, would you mind doing that?
Senator Hooker, does that work for you in terms
Well,
of your question?
Has this begun, the prioritization
Yes.
already? Okay, that's.
Well,
Yeah.
not communicated yet we're building out the schedule.
But have you looked at?
Well,
the
you
gave us the
schools
list.
determined? Yeah.
You emailed us the list.
We have been working to prioritize that list, and I'll have Trish describe that work.
So the way we worked through the prioritization, we broke age of school up into 3 different groups. The group that was built and constructed between 1960 and 1980, which is when we think the highest use of PCBs was, got the highest point score from that group. We looked at schools where they may have done PCB remediation already. So if they replaced windows or something else and they know that there are PCBs in their school, we prioritize those schools. We looked at schools that have a higher population of low income, so free and reduced lunch, and we prioritize those schools. We looked at schools that are planning to do renovation or reconstruction, and we prioritize those schools. And schools that are doing HVAC replacement, we did not prioritize those schools because we want to do it after their HVAC replacement happens. So we looked at all of those schools. We basically allowed our calculations to rank them for us, so they ended up coming up in a list for us. And then I continue to prioritize schools based on schools that have reached out to me already to let me know that they're ready to move forward sooner rather than later. And so I tried to prioritize some of those schools. In the end, most of those schools were ones that had already ranked high, so it didn't really change the time frame that we would have sampled them. And then I interlaid the number of staff that I have and consultants. So I was making sure that I wasn't asking one staff person to sample 10 schools in one school district in one quarter, because that would be ridiculous. So that's the current way that schools are prioritized. My expectation was to let schools know dates and when we wanted to sample the schools and make sure we got feedback from them. I was able to map out schools for the first year to try and at least get dates for them. It turns out to be about 35 schools a quarter is what we're looking at if I'm pushing it to try and get to 2024. And it might be more coming towards the end. So being able to have some of that breathing room to be able to provide the guidance that we normally provide community assistance, and make sure that we are doing a good job evaluating the data coming into us and not trying to rush through it to get to the next one, really helps if we can spread it out a little. So the schools that would be towards the end of the process are the ones that are built in the 1800s and early 1900s, so lowest likelihood for PCBs to be present in those schools.
So we need to get, we have a gubernatorial appointment waiting, so,
Just
yeah,
a
please.
quick question. How many staff members do you have that are working on this, that you would be deploying to this?
So working exclusively on this, the number is much lower, but as Trish has described, she has assigned, so each of her staff manage a certain number of sites.
Okay.
And so what she's done is to farm out that work around the school so that we have experts in this work ready to support schools in doing it. I believe, Trish, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we have one new staff member who you were looking to hire to be the coordinator, but it's been a challenge. I mean, I know you've probably heard this from everybody, hiring people right now is really, really hard.
So how many people are working on this? I guess I haven't heard that.
So Trish is spending a lot of her time as the manager of the program putting this together. There are partners at AOE and VDH who are contributing a significant amount of time. VDH had money in the budget last year to hire somebody to support as well. And we have part-time equivalents from how many people, Trish, do you have who you're going to assign schools to?
10.
So.
Thank you.
That doesn't include the brownfields coordinator position that hasn't been hired yet.
So we're putting a full court press as much as we can on this.
The vehicle for this date change would likely be where, I know you were talking with Representative Webb.
I have not had significant conversations around what that would look
Okay,
like.
so so again, we've got some time to consider it and think about it.
I don't think
I mean,
anybody's.
she could put in miscellaneous ed, we could put in the budget, there are different
Right,
spots.
I don't think there was a desire to address this before crossover. It was more,
No, I understand. Right,
let's take the time to be thoughtful about this. It just happened to come up yesterday, so I wanted to have the opportunity to raise it with you all.
The final piece I have recollection, and one of the reasons we reached out to initially is in the budget last year, we put language that said the legislature will come up with a plan to address this. And it's really all of you that have come up with the plan. I just want to make sure that we're responding to what we said in the budget.
So
And
you, I believe, and obviously my memory is about as good as yours from last session, but I believe that was in response to requests from the school, the Superintendent's Association and others in the V's around what are you going to do to help us when we find this, right? The Burlington situation was scaring the bejesus out of folks.
Sure.
And so we talked about the fact that, we have $5 million for testing, but at $15,000 to $20,000 a pop, or we have $4.5 million for testing, but at $15,000 to $20,000 a pop, we may not even be able to get through all of.
so I apologize. Is there a gubernatorial recommend that would go into the budget to start to build some?
There is
some money,
nothing specific, mostly because of the language that you put in there with the assumption that you guys were going to consider it going forward. So we're happy to engage in those conversations. Again, it's because of the time it's taken to do this deliberately. We don't have a sort of, hey, we've tested 40 schools and
Yeah.
and 15% have tested, and therefore we extrapolate, you're gonna need $70 bazillion or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I don't have the ability to do that for you yet.
And as I mentioned to you yesterday in the hall, we're not an anomaly. This has got to be happening everywhere here in the United States. Are you all in contact, or will you all be in contact with our federal delegation for dollars for this?
So that's a good question, and Trish may be able to answer more as to what's happening in other states. PCBs are a topic area that often
Well, maybe
don't come
so
up
even
as
if
often.
it's not happening in other states, we could use some federal funds.
Potentially, but that's gonna be a slow process to get to the point where those are available.
Yeah.
I could see situations where now that earmarks are back, those
Yeah,
sorts of
yeah,
things could be
yeah.
helpful. But I don't know how, a school community is gonna struggle with the hope that they get an earmark.
No, I understand, but is there a way to start to build some capacity? I know that St. Mike's is asking for earmarks, all the, this is sort of Senator Leahy's last hurrah, as I understand it. And man, I would hope, no offense to St. Mike's, great school, I'd rather get some PCB remediation money than.
We can certainly flag those issues
Okay.
for the delegation and see what's possible. It's difficult, as the earmarks have to go typically towards a specific project, and because we haven't
see.
identified a specific project yet, that's a challenge.
I see.
The other information you may want, I know there's been some discussions over time with the Attorney General's office about the idea of, similar to PFAS, some sort of litigation in this space that could be a source of funding. And so it might be worth having Rob McDougall or Josh Diamond in to speak to that.
Everybody okay? All right, I think we'll leave it there. Great. Thank you both. Really appreciate it. Likely to see you again, but this has been very helpful. Any final comments?
What's the next step? Are you gonna come back with?
We're gonna, I think the idea that what House Education asked us to do, and we're happy to keep you all in the loop as we do this, was to sit down with our team and to sit down with stakeholders in the discussion to say, what do we need to do to make this program effective? And how do we build that? And are there things that we want to think about, whether that's timing or other things, to make sure that we're doing this thoughtfully now that we know what we know at this point, and bring that back to you all. I think the House had planned on taking that up as part of their consideration, potentially miscellaneous ed. I don't live in your world. I don't know necessarily how that works.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but we're happy to come back as we have those conversations, because we want to make sure that if we bring an idea to you, that it's reasonably well baked and you can tell us how you respond to it, but that we've had input on it from others.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Nice to see you in the afternoon.
It is nice to be here in person.
Yeah, it's great.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you. Committee, we're going to shift. We have a gubernatorial appointment. Mr. Brown, you're with us. We see some of you.
Okay, let me adjust here.
Thanks, Peter.
There you go.
There you are.
There.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. There we go. Thanks so much for joining us. We're so pleased that you've been nominated to be on the State Board of Education, and you're from Burlington, and you have two senators here. You have Senator Lyons on the screen, and then Senator Chittenden, who you just have to step out momentarily. He is here as well. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us why you're interested in being on the State Board of Education.
Well, I got to thank you for this opportunity. And Senator Lyons, your fame precedes you. I've known of you for so many years, but never put your face to the name. So even though you're a Chittenden County Senator, and Senator Tom Chittenden, who I know very well from UVM, and good partner in programming over the years. So to answer your question, I've been on the board since last August. So half my year has gone by already.
A
So,
little behind.
so I have served, I have done a number of different things in the county and in the state. And so I'm hopeful that this is one of my last civic duties, as I just celebrated a birthday on March 7th. So soon I'm going to be pushing 100. So it's almost time to wind down. So because I've been involved with the school district, the Burlington School District, in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I have actually worked for the Vermont Department of Labor. I've been an adjunct lecturer at the University of Vermont since 1999. I initiated the Vermont recognition of the annual Dr. Martin Luther King program. In the early 90s, I advocated and worked untiringly with Kathy Hoyt and Governor Howard Dean to make the holiday a holiday in the state of Vermont, because Vermont was one of 4 states that did not recognize the holiday. And so I have worn many hats in Chittenden County and in Vermont. I have served on the United Way of now Northwest Vermont for 2 terms. I've served on the board of the now defunct Burlington College. I have, and so I've worn a lot of hats. Today I serve on the New American Advisory Council. I was heavily recruited by AgeWell. I served on the board at Howard Center. I served on the board of the Fletcher Free Library, served on the board of City Market. So there are a number of, I have a lot of old board hats. And so the other thing, I was so surprised to see that there was no diverse representation on the State Board of Education, especially here in the 21st century. And so these were some of the things why I thought I would apply to get onto that board, and was successful.
Oh, terrific. What do you teach?
So I teach Introduction to the Caribbean and Central America, and I've taught race and cultural values in education and other Caribbean and Central American related courses, because I'm from the beautiful island of Jamaica.
Wonderful, wonderful. Senator Hooker has a question.
I do, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Brown, for being here. Congratulations on your appointment,
Thank
although
you.
you're kind of a seasoned member now, it seems. And so I have a question. Yesterday or the other day, I lose track of the days, we interviewed another one of the board members, a student, and she too mentioned diversity, equity, and inclusion. And my question to you is, since you've been on the board since August, has there been discussion about these issues on the board?
Yes. And so one of the things I've introduced on the board, and each month I invite folks from the different school districts to come to the board meetings and to talk about progress or non-progress, successes and challenges in the different school districts. So Winooski was the first one, and the board was so impressed that they asked me to keep it on the agenda each month. And then Burlington followed, and then I thought it would be a good idea to go to some of the rural schools. And so I think the next one is going to be CVU in April, and I'm looking at, places that usually don't get have this type of discussion with the school board.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that the discussions are happening. And I hope that, and I'm happy to see that you're bringing that diversity in your own to the board. Thank you.
Senator Lyons.
And so as we talk at the different board meetings, and that's not the only area that I am able to have input, but just to be sure that the board is being inclusive in the discussion, inclusive of age, of race, of sexual orientation, religious affiliation, taking our indigenous people, people with disability, all of the above needs to be included in the discussions with the state board.
Mr. Brown, Senator Lyons has a question.
Yes.
So thank you. Is it Dr. Brown?
Well, Patrick is fine.
Patrick is fine.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to see you. And so as you're doing this work on the board, it sounds really innovative in many ways, but also an opportunity to gather the information you need to make recommendations to various schools, particularly those that are perhaps less experienced with the issues of diversity that we are
Right.
seeing in Winooski and Burlington. So are you thinking of bringing policy recommendations to the board and then perhaps to the Agency of Education? And ultimately, it might land here, but I'm just
Right.
thinking that you do have a great opportunity.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And we are just in the process of wrapping up the series, the 2200 series that will that the Secretary of Education, Dan French, is very engaged in, and the board is going to finalize its work on that. And that has to be very inclusive and have significantly non-discriminatory pieces to it. And so that's my role in helping to make this happen, in facilitating this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being there. It's terrific.
Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Terenzini has a question.
Patrick, very nice to meet you and congratulations. I don't necessarily have a question. I just want to congratulate you on this position, and your resume speaks for itself. And I'm excited to have met you today and wish you a lot of luck in this new endeavor.
Thank you. And thanks for having me. And Senator Chittenden, do you have a question for me? We know each other so very well. And I just want to say thank you for all your hard work. You know, I know it's a monumental task to be sitting in a boardroom, going through all this paperwork and all the readings. And so whatever you're all doing there on behalf of the citizens of Vermont is deeply, deeply appreciated.
Senator Chittenden.
I just want to express my thanks for all that you do, sir. You really have your hand in so many pots, and I'm really glad that you're continuing to volunteer your time. So thank you very much. It's great to see you.
Yes. Thank you.
Are you really almost 100?
That's what I thought too.
I turned 69 on March 7th. And my mother, who lives in Jamaica, and turned 101 on January 21st. And
Wow.
she is the first one to be up and out in the community each morning, and just very alive, very active, and so. That takes
Well, Patrick, when you're feeling like it, we would love to have you in the committee. It would be great to have you here in person at some point. Perhaps later this session, after you've had some more time on the board, it would be our pleasure to host you here.
Sure, definitely. At the moment, my hands are so full. Last week, right at this very moment, I was engaged. I applied to the Harvard Kennedy School and was accepted to do an intensive course on promoting racial equality in the workplace. There were 47 cohorts from all over the world, and these were high-profile folks doing this work, and it was such a motivating thing for me, and I'm glad I took the, I was bold enough to do it, so now I can brag that I'm a graduate of the Harvard Kennedy School.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Patrick. Anything else that you would like to add to the conversation, or any final comments?
No, except that I want to thank you all for meeting with me, and I will do my very best to serve, to be of some help on the board and to serve to the concept of dedication and cooperation.
Well, it's our pleasure. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.
You too. Thanks. Okay. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye. So committee, next week we'll vote on Mr. Brown and Ms. Lucci. There's one other candidate, waiting study, Ms. Dr. Colby. Tammy Colby, who will be in next week, will vote, and then for new senators, we do these on the floor. I don't think we did any last year, did we? Secretary French, maybe we did. Anyhow, we get up, we say a few words, talk about them, and let people know the committee vote, and then have the whole Senate vote on it. Okay, great. Okay, let's just push through here. Is Mr. Demeray with us?
He's having the same issue, so let me reach out to him.
Okay, why don't we just take a quick, if people can, just a quick 3-minute break and just watch.